Dr. Bernard, you're on mute.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the virtual universe. I am Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, Acting Director of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies on the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies. It gives me great pleasure once again to host yet another event that Salisis on occasions would host. And all of these events are geared toward spreading the good news and expanding knowledge on issues pertaining to development policy agendas, whether in Trinidad and Tobago, the wider Caribbean, or even globally. Just last month, we began a new series in Salisis, the Salisis Visitors Webinar, and we were pleased to have Mr. Hayden Gittins speak on private financing for development in Caribbean societies. Today, we are experiencing the second in this series, the second Visitors Webinar series. We are going to witness the second presentation by two sons of the soil who are located overseas. They are Dr. Sekou Remy, who works and lives in Nairobi, and Mr. Nissan Dookeran, who works and lives in Melbourne, Australia. They are going to be speaking to us on the subject, deriving value from, with artificial intelligence in a Caribbean context. And we are pleased to have them jointly present on this subject. As you are aware, Salisis has had a number of similar events. We have had two events where we had secondary school students from Trinidad and Tobago and other Caribbean countries presenting their research on various themes that are akin to the scholarship and practice of Nobel laureate Sir Arthur Lewis. And every January, in celebration of his birthday, we host these webinars with school children from within the region. And we are pleased with what we have seen coming from these school children. We have also hosted 19 virtual Salisis forums touching on a wide array of topics akin to development studies. And we have also had 8 Salisis spotlight lectures in which we feature Salisis academics, more or less speaking in a keynote fashion on topics that are of interest to them as far as their research and scholarship are concerned. So in this visitors webinar series that we have begun, today we have two esteemed speakers who will be treating with the issue of artificial intelligence. And I always felt that at some point before I leave Salisis, that I would really wish to have a session dealing frontally with the importance of artificial intelligence and how it is going to transform the world within which we live, and indeed here in the Caribbean. And many of us have seen the effects of AI in communications, in health, in education, in business, in finance, and certainly in other areas such as the labor market. And those impacts will certainly intensify as we move into the 2030s, 2040s, 2050s. I always think about the days when I started as a young professional in the early 1980s. And when we engaged in computerized operations, much of what was done back then was done by mainframe computers. And I could remember sitting in the office in the Central Statistical Office and hearing folks talking about, what impact computers would have on the world in the future and how there will be computers on every desk. And in those days, when I was in the Central Statistical Office, the only computers that were in the office were the computers in the computer section of the office, and it was basically a mainframe sort of setup. So it was not surprising after hearing all of that I found myself, and we have all found ourselves living in a world where there are computers on every desk and doing all sorts of unimaginable things that we could not have imagined back in the early 1980s or even the 1970s. Today, we are talking about AI. And although I say today we are talking about AI, AI has been around with us much longer than today. And the impact of AI come 2030, 2040, 2050s, it's going to be astronomical. I do not want to make any claims as to what kinds of emergent developments will manifest themselves come 2030, 2040, 2050. But I do think, our speakers today may very well touch on some of those. So I want to thank all of you who have registered an interest in participating in today's webinar. I am absolutely sure it's going to be a mouth-watering treat for you. And I'm really heartened by the fact that as we were about to begin, it came to my attention that we had as many as 127 persons from across the globe tied into this webinar. Of course, this series is very dear to Salisis because we understand that many of our postings have actually found their way in the classrooms. And this is exactly what we intended to accomplish because we really feel strongly that a lot of our knowledge generation productions should actually find their way in the classrooms, whether in secondary schools or tertiary institutions or in training sessions that treat with issues of relevance to what we address here in Salisis. And I am quite proud to know that that is the case, that, our products are actually finding utility in various domains. So having said that, I will stop here at this point, and I would wish to introduce the two speakers, Dr. Sekou Remy and Mr. Nissan Dookeran. Sekou El Remy is a staff research scientist and challenge lead at IBM Research Africa, with a keen interest in the ways systems, that is technology, can interact with health. More broadly, he is also interested in developing appropriate technologies which will transform Africa and the world. A proud alum of the Georgia Institute of Technology, Electrical Engineering, and of Morehouse College Computer Science, Sekou has spent time learning and teaching at Clemson University, the University of Notre Dame, Spelman College, and at the University of Washington. At IBM, Sekou has worked on a portfolio of projects considering practical applications of machine learning in decision support with the aim of increasing the scale and the scope of evidence used to make decisions. And it should not have been Notre Dame, it's Notre Dame. The next speaker, Mr. Nissan Dookeran. Nissan Dookeran, based in Melbourne, Australia, is an entrepreneur renowned for guiding teams through disruptive yet practical strategies in applied AI and blockchain consulting, architecture, and development. His professional journey with technology spanning over 2 decades originates from foundational work in a full stack web technologies in Trinidad and Tobago, evolving to present day as shaping state-of-the-art applications of AI and blockchain in multiple business verticals, from finance to healthcare to game development. A proud alumnus of the University of the West Indies, Nissan's global footprint is ever expanding from his Melbourne endeavors to his significant influence in the Sydney startup scene. As a former CTO for cutting-edge startups, he was at the forefront of revolutionizing game development by adeptly leveraging generative AI for text and image generation, demonstrating the perfect confluence of technology and creativity. Nissan's commitment to societal upliftment is unwavering, actively mentoring undergraduate teams. He has championed for breakthroughs in the healthcare tech sector. A key focus has been an assistive AI aimed at enhancing vision recognition capabilities in medical scans. Their collaborative mission, transforming the landscape of medical care in low-income regions, notably Haiti, ensuring that top-notch healthcare is viewed as an essential right. His entrepreneurial prowess is further accentuated as a recognized community advisor to Sydney's Builders Club, where he plays a pivotal role in nurturing and scaling AI-centric startups, understanding and ethical use of technology. Affiliations with esteemed incubators like Blackbird Giants and Antler reaffirm his eminent position in tech entrepreneurship. Having also made significant contributions through past roles at Microsoft and Ortho, what sets Nissan apart is his unyielding drive to ensure that AI and blockchain are not just revolutionary, but also socially impactful. As a speaker, he offers an amalgam of deep technical expertise, visionary perspectives, and a fervent commitment to global progression. So you have heard the bios of these two esteemed speakers. I am honored and extremely grateful that they obliged to participate in today's webinar. And without further ado, I wish to now present to you Dr. Sekou Remy and Mr. Nissan Dookeran. Gentlemen, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for having us today. And as you mentioned, AI is not new. Nissan, you can go ahead and share. But the way that the public experiences AI has changed radically over the past few months. Earlier this year, I had a chance to sit with some Catholic educators and crack open the question of, like, what is AI? And since then, it's become abundantly obvious that we need to make this jargon make more sense to the people who are engaging with this technology daily. So again, really thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Salisus, for letting us, visitors, have this dialogue, and we hope that this is a beginning of a conversation. right? Next slide. So the way that most of us engage with AI, let's say today or last year, is actually this search bar. This is the way that most of us on a daily basis, sometimes even 7 or 8 times per day, we are acquiring information. And this information is filtered, processed, and made available to us, all with the use of AI. But many times we are not really conscious or focused on, like, how does it work? How am I impacted by it? But moreover, how do I interact with it? We're not really conscious or focused on those things. So today we would like to demystify a bit and also show what this AI interaction will look like in the future, and for some of us is already looking like now. So next slide. So just as a level set, AI, artificial intelligence, there are many other AIs out there. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page. But this is speaking about systems that are taught to simulate human intelligence and thought processes. And that simulate word I highlight because it doesn't mean that it actually is intelligent, but it has the ability to simulate intelligence. If you can't tell the difference between an answer that was generated with the use of AI and an answer that was generated from some entity that you view as intelligent, then one would then beg the question, or one would ask the question, is that AI truly intelligent or not? And that's a question that is deep philosophical, but we're getting to the point where these systems can generate answers or generate responses that are good enough to get things done. Next slide. Now, the way that they do it is mystifying to some, and sometimes you hear these terms, AI, machine learning. This is one way to make sense of that space. So the broad field is AI, and in that field, there is one subset called machine learning. It is one of many. In the past, we had expert systems, we had fuzzy systems, but machine learning has taken dominance in the recent, let's say, 2 decades. The kind of results that are generated with ML have dominated the attention, dominated the focus. Right? Within machine learning, there are multiple types of learning mechanisms, and we can say one of them is supervised learning, another is unsupervised, and the third is reinforcement. At the end of the day, though, all of these are examples of learning with data. Data is the core. Next slide. So here we have images, 3 images. For those of you that may have a background in horticulture, you know exactly what you're seeing. For me, this is not about horticulture. This, for me, is how I entered the universe of data. These 3 pictures are pictures of 3 species of iris flowers. To the untrained eye, okay, they just look like 3 flowers. However, there are features or there are attributes of these flowers that those who understand them well can use to detect and to identify, recognize some important encoded information. Next slide. These flowers were used as the core of a data set that was initially released in the 1930s. And this data set was the first data set that I recall being exposed to as a student. It was not a big data set. It was 50 rows, meaning 50 entries, characterizing features of flowers. The featureization is something that's important because you go from an image, an artifact in the real world, an object in the real world, to a digital representation. In this case, sepal length, sepal width, petal length, and petal width. So now you can go online and you can get access to this data set. It's available in a few places. But at small data, this is a really awesome opportunity to actually understand what is this machine learning thing all about. Next slide. So If you were to do something that the machine learning universe calls exploratory data analysis, the first thing that you would find that you draw yourself to do is let's plot it. Let's see what the data look like. So if we were to look at the leftmost image and the topmost image, here we have a plot of the sepal length versus the sepal width. And each of these dots is associated with one of those 50 data points or data sets, which is a flower. And we can see that the red color is associated with one particular species of this flower, and that's the setosa. It seems separated from the other two, the green and the blue. There's a concept that draws us. There's this notion of linearly separable. We can draw a line. If you look at the other graphs on this chart, it seems to be a consistent trend, no matter which combination of features you choose. However, versicolor and virginica, it's harder to separate the two. In some cases, there may even be blurring. Now, this is just plotting the data, plotting the raw data. Machine learning, as an example of the class of AI, is all about using that data to help make evidence-based decisions. Next slide. These decisions might reflect themselves in tasks. So classification of an image, or in this case, classification of a flower based on the features is one common AI ML task. Regression, and I know that there are many of you in the room with an economics background, but yes, I include regression on this list. Regression and AI have a mixed history, but there's a concept of trying to predict or generate an output, a real valued output based on the input provided. Ranking, when we talk about search, there are millions of possible results that you could have gotten when you typed that entry into search. But the idea is that you only want to get the good ones first. You don't want to search 5 pages in, 5 clicks in to get a result that's useful. Next slide. As an example, classic example, and many of us have bird feeders or amazing flowers around our homes that attract hummingbirds. The opportunity to demonstrate classification is now widely available through data sets like this hummingbird data set. So you have labels that indicate, okay, this is an example of an image, maybe a blurry one, you're limited by the data that's available, but there's a label that says this is a broad-tailed hummingbird and it's a female. And maybe there are multiple examples that you can get of that. But this data is used as the core of your ability to train a system, in this case, a classifier, to assign a category to each item in that corpus. Next slide. The engine, which makes all of this possible, is a neural network. This is just one simple version of this thing called a neural network. There are many different formulations, and we can talk more about them in the question and answer session. But at the crux of how this network works is that you may have nodes that are used as either inputs or collectors of information, and there are edges. So you can view each of these edges capturing a weight, a parameter. And when you have, let's say in this case, dozens of edges, you can combine them to generate equations that can help you transform a given input, whether that input is that 4 features, sepal length, sepal width, petal length, petal width, and generate output of the appropriate type, setosa, Virginia, etc. All right. So the neural network is the workhorse of machine learning today. Next slide. When we talk about neural networks these days, we normally don't just talk about neural networks. The buzzword is deep neural networks. What does that mean? In essence, just think of, instead of having, let's say, a dozen weights, because we have multiple, and when I say multiple, I mean on the order of thousands of hidden layers. Maybe we're talking on the order of trillions of weights, trillions of parameters that are used to transform input into the output that we desire. Next slide. In modern AI, transfer learning is probably one of the most revolutionary things, and we should all understand how it comes to be. But let's say I trained my neural network and it had the ability to learn all of these categories. How do I identify a broad-tail male, a broad-tail female? I'd showed you some of the categories that were shown previously. But in that classifier, maybe I also trained it to identify that there's no bird, because that may be really important. Don't try to find a particular hummingbird if there is no bird present. But if I had trained a network to categorize hummingbirds, maybe with a little bit of work, I can reuse that pre-trained network to do something that was not originally desired. Maybe that network has encoded enough useful information that I can now use it to identify how many birds, for example, are in the image, right? I may have trained it to categorize certain types or classes of hummingbirds, but that network may have enough latent information buried inside that it can now do this other task. Another example is maybe because most pictures of hummingbirds probably have a backdrop of trees, maybe I can use it to bootstrap how a classifier can now predict or categorize the types of trees in that location. This is no different from somebody who learned to drive in San Fernando. All of a sudden, they're thrown into Belmont, and they're now asked to drive in Belmont. One doesn't say, I can't drive in Belmont. Well, some may. Belmont roads are narrow. It's not for the faint of heart. But you still have the ability to transfer what you learned before, maybe with a little bit of fine-tuning or modification to make that work for you. Next slide. So modern AI is different. And when I say it's different, I mean, it's no longer the search where you figure out what's the right thing that you want to ask. Now you have a lot more flexibility. You can now engage with AI and say, please fill in the blank. Once upon a time, A, and these tools will provide you with a response. This response may not have been was not the response that the model or the AI system was designed to answer, because it does not know who you were and what you would want to do. It is intentionally leveraging this concept of transfer learning and intentionally leveraging the concept of training on massive amounts of data with the hope that there is something useful encoded that can be reused for your use. So for the rest of the talk, Nishan is going to show a few practical, concrete, real examples. And if the demo gods are nice to us, maybe we can even do this live. But the goal is to actually open this box, because many times the conversation are happening around us, or they're happening in spite of us, but we need to step into those conversations and ask, how is this working? How can I use this? What can it or can it not do? Because that's critical to make sure that we can make better use. Back to you, Nishan.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dr. Remy. So let's see if I can get this going. So I'm just going to start with a quick video. Can you hear me? Yes? Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm just going to start with a quick video about something that quite amazingly just got released just yesterday. So bear with me for 1 minute as we take a look at the future. So this is kind of new that came out yesterday. So everyone has heard about ChatGPT, which lets you generate text based on your questions. It's sort of a very intelligent way of doing things, but now they're actually letting you do images as well. It's not public yet, but this is what's coming in the next few weeks for those who use the ChatGPT tool. But I wanted to push the edge, and I actually wanted to bring some Trinidadian context to it. So I use ChatGPT as well. I actually use it quite frequently, but for this particular space, we're going to talk about first creativity and then some business aspects. So with the creativity person, I actually want to find a little about Nancy, who is, with the spider that we know about from local Trinidad law. And it gave me some information about Nancy here, which I didn't know too much that it actually came out of West Africa. I actually didn't know, but for purposes of education, I saw that, well, besides not knowing about Anansi, I have a 5-year-old child, and I tell them bedtime stories, and I want them to learn the value of sharing. I'm not a great storyteller, but they've been having trouble integrating in school, and I think bedtime stories are a good way to communicate it. Pretend you're Nancy and tell me a story about sharing to this 5-year-old. And it actually did generate a really great story. I will share the link after if anyone wants to the actual ChatGPT conversation. And you can read. It's a pretty decently written story as a first pass. With my input as a parent tweaking it, I can actually get my words across with the message about teaching the value of sharing to my 5-year-old. Now, the thing is, children learn from like images as well. I didn't want to just give a plain story without some pictures. So I said, well, tell me about some pictures that I might need, because I want to generate some pictures off of this. But I'm not a great drawer. I'm not an artist of any kind. But I just needed good enough to help my child kind of visualize this thing while I'm doing the story with them. And it gave me some prompts here, describing some objects that might be in the story. And what I did is I took the text from one of them and I put it in another tool called Dream Studio. What Dream Studio does is it generates images from text. And these are all computer synthetically generated images. This is not an artist drawing it. It is based on examples of artists that it has looked at the images for, similar to how Dr. Remy talks about features. It extracted features, except we didn't have it in a table. It used mathematics to distinguish the associations of all the various images and what text they were associated with to create this great matrix of numbers. And in me giving it this prompt here, it took that prompt and it generated a similar series of numbers in a matrix. And then it tried to map what's the closest association using a very, very advanced search technique. And it came up with this. And the amazing thing is this was all mostly free. I paid for some credits for the images because I wanted a really high quality one. But as I'll show you, we can run this on your own computer or with some free cloud hosted resources if you wanted to. Now, in all, the chat is actually linked here. I used two tools called ChatGPT and Dream Studio, and it took me less than 20 minutes to give me this. Now, what does this mean? It does not mean that we're replacing creatives. What it means is we are helping augment the power of creatives to be more creative. It helps me as a non-creative communicate with creatives by showing them examples very early on of what it is I'm looking for in the realm of what I want, so that they can take their magic, whatever's not doable by a computer, and augment it further. So this is actually kind of interesting when it comes to real images, because as you can see here, someone was creative enough to take the Mortal Kombat game and generate a video with celebrities. So people like Barack Obama, the Pope, Kanye West, Mark Zuckerberg are now characters in Mortal Kombat based on an AI manipulating the images that were there and replacing them with images that we found, which is kind of creative, but can also be a little scary. But getting back to more serious things, if I'm a consummate learner, I want to learn about different things all the time, but I don't also have time for a course. What I've found ChatGPT to be good at is to help like a personal tutor. So for example, I'm a computer science student. I wanted to learn or refresh my memory about the quicksort algorithm, which is, not a terribly complex one, but it takes a little while to understand. I just asked ChatGPT to give me an algorithm in a language I knew. I didn't actually ask it for a language, but it gave me the simplest language there. That was Python. And then I also know that there's this thing called Mermaid, which is a visualization syntax. I said, well, give me some syntax that will visualize what this algorithm is actually doing. And it did a great job because it actually did give me some syntax as an output on the left-hand side. And you can see I put it in here. I got a visualization of how the quicksort algorithm works. That's pretty easy to follow, or if not too easy, I can still ask about it. But this is kind of amazing because I did this without a tutor. I did this just by asking questions. It explored all the information that was out there that it had mined and it had gathered. It doesn't know about programming. It doesn't know what algorithms. Just it has such a rich corpus of data that it gave me these results. And I can see this being more practical back to normal folks. You know, for things like a mortgage. Like when I went to one of the banking websites, it asked me to apply for a mortgage. It's a series, like this is pages and pages of stuff. I was like, okay, I need some help. I'm unfamiliar with applying for mortgage. Can you simplify it for me? And I used this thing called plugins, which says it doesn't have the information right away about this particular website because it came out after the chat, the data was explored. But I used an Explorer plugin to then say, well, this is the website. It went and it looked at the website. It took the content of that website, processed it, and brought it back into the context of the conversation. And then it gave me hopefully better language about how to actually apply for mortgage. On top of that, because I already know that it can visualize things for me, it can generate visuals for me, I told it, well, give me a visualization of what the process is. And boom, I have an image of like, what's the mortgage process, what I should start doing, what's the different things I need to have. And this, I think, was a little bit more palatable for me. But let's take it a little bit further. If I wanted to look at the budget day is coming up. Last year's budget, there was a lot of stuff happening. There was like a 51-page statement, which I probably won't have time to read, but I gave it my conditions. This is the statement of this is the PDF. What taxes affect me? I'm a middle income parent. I have 3 children. I run a small business. I have several conditions, like I run a car that is in CNG and I work part-time. ChatGPT actually gave me the summary that I needed. It told me which parts of the document I needed to pay attention to, what the areas I should look at. And then just being responsible as a responsible AI, it told me at the end, I should probably consult with a tax professional to get more details, which is part of the question, responsible AI is actually one of those things that's coming up more and more as these things get more powerful. So I want to show us, I'm hoping the demo got a good test. We're going to do a quick demo here. I'm going to show you how to do this for something real. So let me just stop my presentation for a second. And I'm going to bring a new chat up. I'm going to tell it that, let me just try and get my text copied. I want to apply for a passport. I haven't been, it doesn't know what the passport site from the internet, but I want to enable some plugins as well because it doesn't know about these things. So I'm going to enable this tool called Web Pilot. What it does is it lets it go out on the internet and scrape the contents of a web page. And just in case, I'm going to add Wikipedia as well, so that you can check for the latest information about Trinidadian stuff. So the question I'm going to ask is like, okay, the instructions I found for a passport are here. The form is actually here. I want a simple summary of what documents I need to have to complete my passport. And I do that query. What it's actually going to do is it's going to go out using the plugin, scrape that website, scrape that document, process it, feed it into the same statement I have here as an additional piece of information. And then ChatGPT is going to come back and it's going to tell me, okay, this is what I need for my passport. I need to show that I'm a citizen. And you know, all these different pieces of documents that I need to have. And it tells me if I'm born in Trinidad, if I'm not born in Trinidad. So let's assume that, and then it tells me what I need to do, the requirements. Okay, so this is what I need to do. This is the steps I need to take. It's pretty good, you know. Maybe not terribly complicated, but it is something that's real time and is information it didn't originally have. So let's make it a little more personal. So let's say I have a specific scenario where I am not exactly Trinidadian by by living here. I'm half Barbadian. I have dual citizenship with America. I never held a passport before. What do I do? These are questions you probably spend an hour on the phone trying to call the immigration officer to find out. Here I can just ask it if I can get a passport, and it'll interpret the documents for me. It's like, yeah, you can get a passport. And then it'll tell me what's the conditions I need to be for a passport to be a passport holder. So one last part, which is kind of amazing, and this is particularly for me because I'm in a country where I meet daily people whose native language is not English. And it's if you're in a country like Australia where there are like probably 20 different languages people speak because of the various regions, it's probably difficult to have 20 signposts with all the same thing. So if I was to say, well, this is not the greatest translation for me because I don't natively speak English or I haven't spoken it in a while, can you give me the answer in Spanish? And what it'll do is a document that was written in English, it will give me back pretty good Spanish. It's translating the contents of those documents from English into Spanish on the fly. Now, I think this is in itself a pretty amazing application, especially when you consider the number of languages that are out there and how often it's very hard to find a translator. And this is just another example of how AI can transform the world that we know today. Let's bring it back to my presentation. So I hope I haven't been too long-winded there, but just to give you an example of other things that I've done, I've generated images using my own computer. This is an example of a Caribbean family at the beach having a picnic. You know, this is a example of art in the style of Michel John Camus' Casabon of Carnival. You know, Casabon wasn't here for modern day Carnival, but if he was, what would his interpretation of Carnival today look like? And this could be something that I'm not an art critic, but maybe it's close to the style. You know, I can also ask it, well, this is old time Carnival in style Casabon. Suppose I want to see it, like, what would happen if Van Gogh took a stab at it? Or Rembrandt, or in this case, these are very powerful things, but they also bring up some questions about good sides and bad sides of AIs. And I'll let the questions flow in for this, but from my perspective, personalization, helping productivity, helping creativity are some of the great things that happen with AI. Some of the sides conversations that happen where people are concerned really talk about things like, you know, will it take my job? You know, will my information, because it's learning from information, the information that I share that it learns from, will this now be everyone's information? And in cases for corporations, this is kind of scary. How do we protect the information that we have in sharing with ChatGPT from other people exploiting it? Will I be using this the right way? If I have information as, you know, people have tried to fool ChatGPT to tell us how to build a bomb. Like that's not a great conversation. It's something I need to make sure is not something that people use my AI in a manner that's nefarious and not useful. And then this concept of energy usage, which is a bigger conversation because these things take a lot of GPU power. Similar to the arguments about Bitcoin mining, people are asking, are we burning more electricity than is socially good or environmentally good by querying these databases, these large language models, they call them, or these diffusion models to generate images? So with that, I think that was as far as I got. This is one last part. This is I didn't want to blow your head too much with too many complicated things, but this is one of the more advanced features of AI, where it's now tying the AI with tools that exist out there that to then generate a chain of thought. So I asked it to tell me how to get to Trinidad and Tobago, visiting Barbados, Jamaica, and Tobago along the way. It broke itself up into a series of tasks, and then it went out on the internet and found the additional information about the airline flights and costs and all this sort of stuff in a series of 4 minutes. And this is the kind of transformation that's going to come to our industry with these large language models, because they're not just large language models in isolation. They work with the existing tools and APIs that we've created for the other products, and then talking to them automatically, and then using chain of thought reasoning, give us what could be considered something you'd normally ask a human person to help you with. And with that, I will conclude. and hand it back to Dr. Remy and Dr. St. Bernard.
Right. Hopefully we haven't sped through too quickly. I know that there are already a few questions in the chat, but we want this to be a discussion. We want this to be a conversation that is, we acknowledge is just the beginning. I know we talked about demystifying, but the goal was really to show what's there, because many times the hype can get the better of us. There's also an element, and we kind of hinted to this, but we hope that some are interested. There's an element of, okay, where does all of this data come from? What are the things associated with data that could go left? There was a panel, I think, earlier this week at Queen's Hall. I'm sure that they were asking questions relating to AI and Carnival that now gets to, okay, well, what are the concerns that creative, let's just use it broadly, creative practitioners, people who make a living based on their creativity. I know one of the existing challenges is, okay, well, now Sekou can go sit on a computer somewhere far away, and now he can generate a picture, and maybe he will never buy my paint or never buy my product. So these are things that I hope that we can dig into. I think, Dr. St. Bernard, you are the one who is going to mediate the questions for us. I took a stab at one of them because it was just I just couldn't help myself. So back to you.
Okay, thank you very much to Dr. Remy and Mr. Dookeran for the collaborative style of your presentation. And I am hoping that there are many questions out there that are being posted by the audience, by the virtual audience. I have here a question from Sherwin Marcel. Why not speak on LLMs instead of the product ChatGPT? Also, plugins is a paid feature. Why not demo the free use model instead? I don't know if you understand the question he's asking there.
I can reply. It was faster and more reliable to just use ChatGPT. I can show other things, but because this was an introductory seminar, I'm not going to come to you and show you a Mazda when I can show you the Mercedes. I want you to be amazed and start asking questions. So I'm showing you the best that's out there so that you can then ask yourself, how can I build something that gets to be the best? And you can dive deeper. This is supposed to be the start of the conversation, not the end. So I'm apologizing if it seemed like I was ChatGPT heavy. It was really, I wanted to make sure that everyone saw a very powerful demonstration of what was possible. I can bring it back down. Like, I build these things on my computer and using as many free services as possible. If we want to have a follow-up on how to do those things, I'm very happy to accommodate. But I'm not saying by any means that there's a digital divide here that we cannot cross. It's not going to be like e-commerce in Trinidad where we still can't get it working right. These things are accessible to you and me as regular residents of the Caribbean to build and to use, with our creativity being the only limitation to it.
I think one other thing to add in that answer, many of us don't know what we already have access to. So for example, if you have a Gmail account, you already have access to a large language model without having to get an account somewhere else. There will always be debates about, should you use a particular version of an LLM, large language model, or should you use a large language model provided by a particular provider or not? I am of the opinion that there will not be only one that you may use. You will have different use cases. And maybe in some context, maybe you will ask certain questions in one setting and not another. So I think that it's really, yes, showing Bard is Google. There's an element of us understanding the technology, engaging with the technology ourselves, seeing how it really works for our use cases, and then making an informed decision. So for example, maybe you don't need to use a plugin. Maybe the information that you would like to generate using these tools can be acquired without having to add that X amount of dollars or X amount of whatever currency per month. But yeah, we want this to really be practical. We want to show real things and not get into the hype, because we want people, if you're having a debate, to make this debate real and not an imaginary debate about what AI could possibly be doing.
Thank you very much for answering the question raised by Mr. Sherwin Marcel. And I have another question that comes from one of our Salisis students, actually. She is Valessa Johnson. And she's asking, given the fact that the information that is generated comes from open source irrespective of fact, how can validity be derived from the information that is produced with the use of AI like ChatGPT?
Can I start with that one? So yes, so that comes into one of the questions with AI, which is it's really good at being a know-it-all, even when it doesn't know something, and they call it hallucinations in the field, where it may not know a fact, or it may be giving wrong facts, and it may treat it like truth when it responds. It is up to us to curate the knowledge that we feed it, because as the computer saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. So similarly, when we are training these large language models with data, we must have some validity to the data that's going in to ensure that the validity of responses coming out is there. There can be a whole conversation about the guardrails that are attached to AIs that generate responses. And these are not just the ethical guardrails regarding questions that are nefarious in nature and ensuring it doesn't inspire responses. It could also be things that it's giving wrong responses. Things like copyright come into question as well. When it's using information that's proprietary knowledge from my organization, I want to make sure that only certain people can get access to that in their responses and others can. Large language models don't do that right now because they're trained on all data. So these are areas to explore, and these are actually areas and opportunities for businesses to actually thrive when they can put the sufficient guardrails on, but still get the creative power of the expression from it.
Yeah, there's another piece of that I would encourage us, since this is an academic setting. So anybody remember what the back of a copybook looks like? It's been a while since I've bought a copybook, but my memory is that there were times tables on the back of every copybook that I owned. And it was a functionality that, I don't know, printers decided at some point in time, it was useful for them to put times tables on the back of a copybook. I remember sitting in a class and my teacher saying you can't turn to the back of you can't turn your copybook over because the timetables was there. You had to know these things. Technology. I remember having access to a graphing calculator for the first time. It changed the experience that I had in calculus. Now, the questions that you're asking about these models also applies with these technologies as well. Now, do I know how my TI-89 works? Do I know who programmed it and what is in there? How do I know that the answers that I will generate with it are actually correct? Some of these issues that we're talking about are issues that we have seen with other types of technologies before. Where this is different, and I do believe that there is a difference, is the rate, the velocity at which actions, the velocity at which the effect of a change can be experienced, the scale at which these technologies have the ability to impact life. That's where we're talking something different from the graphing calculator or the copybook. But these are good questions, and I hope that we're able to answer. Sorry, not we in this conversation today, but we as a society are able to answer these things because they need answers.
Okay, thank you very much for those answers. And I see that Ms. Jade Valley and Jelani Payne, they are both saying thank you to both of you for your presentation. I think they have enjoyed the presentation quite a bit, and they do have questions which both are posing separately. But before I go to their questions, yet another recent graduate of the MSc Development Statistics that we offer here in Salisis, Ms. Tishana Budu Singh. And I had the pleasure of actually supervising Ms. Budu Singh's work, and she's an outstanding student. She asks, can you speak to some of the developments in ethical AI? From a development statistics perspective, can AI replace survey instruments, physical census data, and I presume physical census taking, policy making, etc.? And she goes on, maybe it's easier to gather metadata, and she stops there. I think the last statement is more like a question.
Yeah,
So,
Lisa?
all right, so all this large language models and just the core concept of AI is it's trained on data. The idea that it generates data from data is actually not uncommon. It's called synthetic data. And yeah, we can get a certain level of synthetic data off of existing data. And then they would think about, well, can we train the model on the synthetic data and get something good? The research has shown that this works to a point, but then there's something called catastrophic collapse that happens, or at least that's what the research is saying. We will always need humans in generating new data to help train these models to get better. There's this concept, I saw it in the chat, talked about human reinforcement learning with human feedback. That's the magic that makes ChatGPT work. Because other than training on the data itself, they actually got humans to go in and say, well, give it some questions, get the responses, and tell me which ones are better than others. And Dr. Remy talked about the reinforcement learning aspect. So they combine two techniques. One is actually classifying the data and the text and doing association for it. And then the other is reinforcing what is good responses from what is bad and letting the model train better that way. So I don't think we will replace ever the need for real data and real instruments. But to some extent, when we don't have enough data, we can use the larger body of knowledge to generate some synthetic data and get some results off of it. But we will always be stuck in that quandary of how do we economically incentivize people to continue to create new data when these things are generating such great synthetic data on their own? So that's actually an economic question I asked in my circles, because right now creators don't want to create anymore because they're worried about, someone being able to do something just like it for cheaper because it's trained on their model. But we do need them to create new things. We do need people to write new books. We do need authors to write new books. We do need storytellers to tell new stories. But we need to make sure the economic incentive is still there for them to do so.
Yeah. Another way to answer the same question is this notion of surveys. And you can treat AI, not just large language models, but AI broadly, as a tool which can be used in many different ways. So for example, do you need to go door to door to figure out how many people live in a house? Well, maybe there are other ways to collect that information or capture that information, all with issues around data privacy. But if you have addressed the provenance, the governance, all of the issues around protection of a people, maybe you can use these tools in other ways. So it could be that because you have access to a large language model, you can have a more flexible way to engage with people so that you're not asking people to fill out a form, a one-time form. You send the form and you ask them to fill it out and then you get it back. Maybe there's a WhatsApp conversation, or maybe there's an interactive website that is now targeted specifically to the people who could be providing the information. And the website could be dynamically adjusting based on the information provided. Yes, this sounds like content that we've seen in the early 90s, but the way that these technologies can be implemented using AI is radically different now. So there's an element of we need to better understand the tools and also better understand how the tools can go wrong. I think that you're asking a great question. I also echo in another way, we can't replace human beings. What we may be talking about is replacing how those human beings accomplish the tasks that they are trying to set out to do.
Thank you very much for the answers. And I note that in the question, there was also a part that asked about, can you speak to some of the developments in ethical AI? And I suspect some of it did come out in the response given by Dr. Remy in his last intervention there. I want to move on to another question, which comes from our colleague, another graduate of Salisis. He earned his PhD from Salisis, Mr. Clarence Henry, and he is asking the question, is the age of universities under threat, given that information is made easy to find and can be, let me see if I can read it again. I'm now getting the sense of it. Is the age of universities under threat, given that information is made easy to find and can be so well organized? I think that's the question. So how it was phrased in the chat was a little confusing. Yeah.
So as an academic in hiding, I ran away from the classroom, but not really. I don't think that universities are under threat now. The way that universities operate has to reflect the tools that are available. Now, it's possible because, and again, I talk about the scale, the velocity at which these tools can generate information. You can't underestimate the impact that that will have on the educational process. But just as Nishan showed earlier, you can put a prompt, you can get an output. But if you are now submitting this output as your response or your exam result, your exam submission, you are now on the hook for whatever is generated. And while we might be talking about AI generating results that are as good as what one would expect a reasonable person to generate, whether we're talking text, whether we're talking images, whether we're talking artifacts, like you can have, as you showed, you can have like programs being generated. But at the end of the day, if you are banking your academic career on this, you have to know enough to know that what you're doing is right. And as a teacher, I'm like, okay, well, maybe there's an opportunity here. Maybe we can have interactions with these tools, the co-creation process, and then maybe instead of having just the artifact being the thing that we're having students submit, maybe we're asking students to critique what they're generating or to compare and contrast things that could possibly result. But I think at the end of the day, education and educational systems have to adjust, have to adapt to the times. I don't all view it as gloom and doom, but you can't ignore it.
Yeah, I agree. The concept, I actually have a startup colleague in Melbourne who's tackling that same question. Like he wants to do away with universities in the sense of the academic curriculum that is given is not conducive to the learning style of his son, who is not special needs, but learns a little bit differently from us. And the content that will interest him, while applicable, doesn't follow the normal curriculum description. And the way he's done that is gamifying it. Now, what I think he needs to get to is the middle ground, which is you still need the university's presence because there's a value to academic rigor that we don't quite have inside of ChatGPT experience. But the part of being like their personalized TA, the areas of the technology or the course curriculum that give them trouble where they may not have an immediate expert available for them, but leveraging the technology well enough to help them in those cases could be incorporated into curriculum thinking about how to study for your exams, how to study for your courses. again, there's also the question of plagiarism, and when they generate things, lawyers have actually gotten in trouble for submitting law interpretations based on what ChatGPT gave to them. It's getting harder and harder for us to distinguish what's generated by these models from what's a human-generated version. I think it's up to us to figure out, like, how do we make sure this is actually authentically generated human content when someone submitted. And for us as individuals to have an honor code enough that we are not going to submit something that ChatGPT wrote for us, but instead let it start our words but not finish them.
Thank you. And I think Jade Valley is also asking if you can just perhaps repeat the definition of AI, which appeared in the first two slides that you had displayed.
Yeah, so it's systems that have the ability to simulate human intelligence and thought processes.
Okay, thank you. Now we move on to Jelani Payne. And the question is, Dr. Remy, I agree, we don't know what we have access to with regards to AI and technology in general. How do we teach persons at the necessary levels what is possible so the trickle-down effect occurs within our community?
Well, venues like this are critical. Opportunities for us, maybe we have heard these terminologies, but with thanks again to Solisys for putting together this gathering, this forum, and being intentional about capturing this content so that it can show up in a classroom. Maybe we also share these recordings with people in our communities. We have to. But I think more broadly, I remember 1993, there was a lot of energy around the tech sector that was coming. Cable and wireless was just talking about entry, if I remember this correctly, into Trinidad and Tobago, and people thought that there was going to be this radical transformation, energy, looking forward to it. But I also remember when Interserve started and a home ISP service. That wasn't that long ago. Now, when you look at what is freely available, not just on the thing like the media sites like YouTube or Coursera or edX, there is a lot of content that is available. Now it's probably the challenge of trying to figure out which of the content that are out there are content that we choose to use our time for. So to me, in addition to the university settings, this formal learning context, I think that we have access as a globe, we have access to information, if we have access to the internet, at a scale that we never had before. And maybe, as Nishan showed, we can even get to using these tools to help us process. So it's kind of meta, but we use the tools to help us learn about the tools. That was my first convincing point. So just as Nishan showed with the example of an algorithm, he wanted to learn an algorithm, that was my testing. There was an algorithm that I'd read about, but I wanted to actually now have a dialogue. I treated ChatGPT, in my case, that's where I started first. I then evaluated Bard with the same question. Now, the kinds of questions that I was exploring were things that I know would have been included in the corpus. So Wikipedia is in there, Stack Overflow is in there. The beauty of those two sources is that these are publicly available intentionally because people are publicly asking questions and people are publicly answering questions. So with such a corpus, when I am coming to ask a question, I may have the ability not just to benefit from the question and the answer, but the question, the answer, and then the other answers that were provided by different people, and then the comments or the discussion about any one of those given answers. Moreover, I can now have this interaction as if I were talking to a smart colleague who was sitting down the hall, or as if I was speaking with a smart colleague who was just a WhatsApp conversation away. That's how these things are different now. So we may be able to get to the answer that you're asking through multiple means. Trickle down. I'm not a fan of the term trickle down for a lot of economic reasons, but I hear the spirit of what you're asking, and I think that it comes from it being intentional about multiple aspects. There is no one way. There's no one source of knowledge. There's no one experience that will teach everybody what they need to know.
Okay, and thank you for those answers. And staying with Jelani Payne, again for Dr. Remy, the question goes, perhaps with a little preamble. Presently, our youth are not being prepared until the tertiary level, knowledge-wise, for the access they have to the technology, as well as the value of the access and the technology itself. Meanwhile, there are books on Amazon on machine learning for 3 to 5-year-old children. How should we prepare our youth for this AI-enveloped future? Very good question.
That's a very great question. That sounds like maybe it's a business opportunity wrapped into a vocation, wrapped into an opportunity. Yeah, I mean, I've had friends who talked about not just AI, but even specifically deep learning textbooks for babies. It's there, it's a niche. But you're right. When I think about, like, I had the experience, my parents were nice enough to me to send me to Fatima Computer Camp. And that was my first exposure to programming at scale. I remember that experience vividly. But if I didn't have that experience, and then I think Nishan and I were in the same situation of, we were at St. Mary's when the first set of computer classes were offered. So we had those formal experiences, but it was backed up by having all of these informal experiences, because there were people around us that said, hey, this looks important, let me try. There is no one way. I go back to this. I think NEHIST has programs that they would like more people to subscribe to. And it's maybe what you're asking is, hey, there's a demographic that is not being reached right now. How can we go to these organizations that have intentionality about training and allow them to say, this is what we're providing for that particular demographic? But again, I go back to, it has to be intentional. It won't just happen at scale.
Yeah. Just to give my background, I didn't have my first computer until Form 6. I had to use the computer facilities at St. Mary's. I was in the labs until 7 p.m. Nightly because I wanted to learn. The thing is, I was lucky to go to a school that had those facilities. As a 3 to 5-year-old, maybe you're not in a position to have access to technology, but if we was to set policies, I think it would be towards making sure that a child should at least know how to use a tablet by the time they're 5 years old. Not for the purposes of gaming, but gaming might be an opportunity for them to embrace this technology, but for them to actually be exposed to it, to get that spark of understanding how this thing works and to get that curiosity starting with them. And it is a very tough question. Like, I think we do need policies to help give accessible technology to more people so that we can prepare them better. But I don't think we need a stringent curriculum. I think people are creative enough, and especially children, that once you give them a device, they kind of figure it out on their own. And then they get the spark of imagination happening. And then it's just for us to provide enough runway for them to take that spark and make it something more concrete.
Okay, thank you for those answers. And we move on now to my colleague from the Mona campus, a woman whom I met while doing academic business on the Mona campus, Miss Christine Marrett. Jamaica is in the house, welcome. And she asks, how to get more Caribbean information in training of AI?
I don't know if the question is maybe opportunities for training in the Caribbean, or but let me assume that's the question, and then maybe she can follow up in the chat. I know that at multiple levels, there are many organizations doing things in the Caribbean. Most of these organizations are either linked to the Caribbean diaspora. This is even separate from what governments are doing in the tech sector. I don't know of a good central clearinghouse. I know that I'm on a few WhatsApp chats where sometimes people share information, but maybe again, I look at this as another opportunity when these questions arise, maybe not just Salisis, but maybe UE more broadly can serve a role in providing a clearinghouse for information. Students I found are extremely creative and extremely determined to find information. But normally when one person finds information, maybe it just sits in their little pocket. But if there is a mechanism to gather and share information, that may be something that can help. But there is no one easy way, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to learn about something specifically, I would say ask ChatGPT. It'll probably give you some stuff. But also like YouTube has been phenomenal with like offering access to like free videos from folks. Sometimes from the brand names like MIT and Stanford put their free courses free. I know UE has some content out there as well. How I learned a lot was from community. If we have specialized community groups that talk about AI or talk about technology, that can be the simplest place. Like peer learning is a very valid technique. The same thing Dr. Remy talked about, where people sometimes learn a little bit and hoard it themselves. I think we need to break that habit. We need to incentivize people to say, hey, what, I learned something new and I'm going to shout about it. I'm going to share with you, because you're not going to share, you're also going to share your information with me, and we can learn together and build on top of each other. We're not going to try and pull it away and say it's my secret. It's more like it's anything, it's going to help you and you help me. And we can encourage that through active technical communities that do talk about things.
And then we move on. Yes. So was there another comment?
No, just saying great questions.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the questions are very, very good questions, I must say so. Yeah, so we move on now to Dr. Olabisi Koboni, who had been a lecturer on the campus for many years and quite an outstanding educator. And she asks, can Dr. Remy go over his explanation of featureization and transfer learning? Actually, this happens in good education. That last statement is just a statement.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at what computer scientists are pretending to do with computers, and I say pretending jokingly, but not really, in essence, we are trying to copy the great examples of intelligence, and that's these living creatures. So when we talk about neural networks, a neural network, really what we mean is an artificial neural network. And it's a very crude approximation of what people have inferred is happening in real beings, real life. So when we talk, I think we're still at the point of trying to understand how do you process, how do you package the processing that would happen in a small mammal? We're still struggling there. But let me say that there are many different formulations or many different framings of what a neural network could look like, how it might work. The secret sauce that many of these researchers are putting out is maybe they've figured out a better way to combine the components. Or maybe some might say, okay, well, all you need is attention. So you have a lot of data, but you don't need to focus on all of the data. Maybe if you can figure out what you need to focus on, but that's also a concept that we have in education as well. Figure out what's important, figure out what's not important, move what's not important away, and just focus on what's important, and you'll be more efficient. All of these are concepts that you can map back to what human beings experience, or what life in general can be said to demonstrate. Now, the transfer learning piece, I say that that's probably one of the phase changes that has occurred recently. So in addition to being able to train models that are billions of parameters, which is not always a good thing, you now have the ability to train and package, capture. Maybe you train the model to classify images into 10 categories. But in the process of being able to be good at that, you might have actually learned latent representations that are also useful for other things. So we're talking about a prompt that is able to generate an image that never existed before of carnival, of people floating above the air. So that sentence, maybe that sentence was never ever written before. However, because there is a language model that has been trained on words that people have said before, that language model was able to be used to encode that sentence into, call it a vector space, numbers. And because you have those numbers, now you can use those numbers as input to something else. So this notion of capture as much information as you can, that's the mindset. So bigger models, more data, that was the push for the past decade, because that's where performance has been demonstrated. And again, there are many issues with this. But now that you have bigger models that are possibly more expressive, the hypothesis, which so far is being shown but not yet proven, is that there is useful latent information in these deep networks. So you can even have, as we saw today, you can have a model that if you tell it, I want an image in the style of a particular artist, how does that happen? There's something called style transfer. So you take the model and you cut it, let's say not necessarily in half, but you cut it off cut off the top. Sometimes they say cutting off the head, and then you replace that head with another head. So instead of training the billion parameters, you're only training the head, and maybe the head only has 100 or maybe 1,000 parameters, and you can train with the 1,000 parameters on your laptop. So that's the notion of saying we take the big, massive, some cases obscenely large model, we chop into it, and we assume that there's useful information where we cut. And now we just add a head on top. And now we say, let's train that head with the model. And maybe we do something called fine tuning, where we add data that we know we would like it to do well on. And now this model, sometimes people use the word foundation model, this foundation model is able to help us. Maybe this is an answer to the question of, well, if everybody is using foundation models instead of training models for themselves, maybe we can get the economies of scale. And I forget what the term is, I'm drawing a blank right now, but the concept is, because we can now amortize the effect or that investment into training this massive model. Lots of data, lots of compute resources. Everybody can't have access to those. But if we can reuse these pre-trained models and then use them as foundation models for other tasks, maybe we can win. But I agree, this is all borrowing metaphors that we have in the real world.
Thank you very much. And I move on now to a question on plagiarism from Rendwina Brown. And it goes as follows. If creating a press release using GPT, for instance, would that be considered plagiarism?
Over to you, Nisha.
Okay. Well, first of all, you have to ask yourself, would you consider it ethical? Before you consider if it's plagiarized. If it's your job to write copy for these types of things, and the ChatGPT is doing it for you, how long before you think your boss is going to realize that they may not need you as much as you think? So you got to figure out as a professional, if the ChatGPT is actually producing copy that's good enough to pass for your final work, you have to find a way to make yourself valuable enough to insert yourself there. Now, that being said, I have met with creators who have read what ChatGPT has written in terms of creative works, and they all agree it's pretty bland. I've read some of the stuff, and it can come out pretty cookie cutter after the third or fourth time. You detect its style. The same way you can detect the style of Rembrandt, you can pick up the style of ChatGPT. It's probably plagiaristic if you're claiming it as your own. There was a case in the US where they said the images that GPT, or not GPT, but diffusion models produce, it's a different technology, but the same concept. You give it text and it gives you an image. Those can't be copyrighted. So if you're producing things with ChatGPT and they're your final words, but not your first, it's probably a little bit plagiaristic, if not unethical. At the very least, it's unethical to do it.
Yeah, I think those were really great answers to the question that was posed by Rentwina Brown. And then I recognize Lennox Silly, who is making a statement, and it goes like this. Last night on CNN, there was a representative of the Writers Guild who was supporting writers who are not being paid by the company that owns ChatGPT. Is this valid?
So the question, is it valid, is not one that I think we have the ability to answer broadly. I think every location will have their jurisdiction and their laws. But this is something that does impact us. As a person, so there are many different strikes happening in different places for different reasons. But you have to think that there is something, that these are hard policies. Like, what do you do? How do you even know, for example, if somebody is using said tool? How do you legislate? What are the effects? So some countries, for example, have gone and said, we will ban generative models. I don't know how you enforce that. But on the other side of the spectrum, you can't ignore, and I think there are many companies that are realizing that it's a risk. If they're putting their reputation on the line associated with a model or a product that they are selling, because maybe they don't have the ability to introspect into their data and know what they have used to train their data, even before we get to bias, even before we get to toxic data, it's there. But if you're a bank and somebody is using this technology to, in essence, help you sell your products, are you really able to put your entire reputational risk out there? How much can you trust? These are questions that people are asking, not just in terms of employee-employer type contract issues, but even customer-company issues. So these are hard questions that I don't think either of us can answer broadly. I'm sure if you find us over a tasty beverage, we can probably share our thoughts.
I mean, America is very advanced when it comes to the concept of intellectual property and intellectual property rights. And that particular question from the Writers Guild was that they trained the model on data that they had not, as writers, given rights to be used that way. But you have to ask yourself the question, if I read a book and I read a lot of Stephen King, and then I write a science fiction novel, and my book sort of looks like a Stephen King novel because of the style and prose I've learned from him, Stephen King can't claim copyright on my book. So the difference now is that we're using technology that processes things 100 times faster than a human can to produce things in a manner similar to how I would write a new book. Does it mean, therefore, that they should be given the same distinguished isolation to say, I can do this? Or does it mean that in turn, if I'm commercializing this product, that I need to pay attribution or royalty costs to the people who I learned to produce information from? Beyond the scope of us, but it is a very localized product because localized topic, because every jurisdiction will have their own rules regarding how we govern intellectual property and its use in training these large language models.
Thank you. And this question comes from Jelani Payne, and it's directed to Mr. Dookeran. If the public and private education sectors are generally behind, read their implementation and provision of access to new technologies, where then can we provide both access as well as teach youth to implement these technologies?
Well, I would argue that private education tends to be a little bit further along than public, but just from the ask, like I was one of those people who didn't have access to technology because of my economic circumstances at a young age. I found a way. I went to my school and I basically, Sekou would know, they basically kicked me out of the computer labs because I kept finding my way in there to learn. Nowadays, we have community centers, we have family members, we have people who may be associated with an organization that provide this kind of access. I think if you seek it, you will find. And where you don't find, I think it's up to us as policymakers to ensure that the facilities are sufficiently available in the community centers, in the communities themselves, that no one is left behind from being able to access this new technology that's out there.
Yeah, I'd add libraries have an important role to play. Libraries have always been a kind of a meeting place. I think that there's a perception that because of the internet, libraries aren't as important anymore. But I think this is one of those places where libraries and libraries programming can be catered to address these issues.
Okay. Again, Valessa Johnson asks, can the information being generated from AI tools like GPT be unique to me, as the creative prompts could be generated by me?
So there's a level of creativity that it comes to setting up the prompts, that because they learn, it's a mathematical model at the end of the day. Like how you put things together will determine what comes out, but there's also a certain level of randomness. If you're asking if you can protect it so that only you can generate these responses, the answer is probably no, because it's using a publicly usable model. There is a way to set, like in ChatGPT and these public things, to set your settings so that the information that you enter is not stored in their data to then retrain, to help fine-tune or train the model better. So that's like protecting information. I'm not sure if I did a good job answering the question, but that's the best I can get.
It's a hard question because at the end of the day, when you put something out there, meaning from the time you type, from the time your digital print is left somewhere, you have no clue where it can end up. So for example, if you look at a WhatsApp chat, WhatsApp tells you end-to-end encrypted. So it's protected, any message between you and somebody else. But you are trusting the company. So you have an element of, well, this is how I believe it works. Maybe I've read the terms of service. And in the terms of service, okay, well, if it's there, I hope that it really does work like that. The common person won't ever be able to know what's there or what's not there, but you rely on trust. The other piece of these models is that it's also possible for these models, because they're so large, to actually copy data. So there's been work that has shown for certain prompts, you can actually get almost the same results back, not because the random seed that you picked is the same as the random seed that somebody else did, but because of the amount of data that exists in that subspace, there's only one easily findable result. So there's an element of memorization that is possible. And now if that's so, this is another way that you thought you generated something yourself, but the answer that you got is the same answer that somebody else would get. But again, these are things that we can't know.
Okay, thank you. And the questions are coming in like rapid fire, but I shall continue. And the next question comes from Mr. Wayne Calendar, who asks, what about the use of AI in the monitoring of activities in EEZ's exclusive exporting zones of small island states in the Caribbean, which do not have enough resources to patrol the waters around them? For example, the use of drones and satellites to identify fishing vessels and the amount of fish being caught in EEZs so that charges can be levied against the external companies.
Yeah, this is stepping outside of the core of what we've been talking about, but it's valid nonetheless. For example, I can speak a little about climate. There are people using foundation models, in essence, image-based models to estimate the amount of tree cover or estimate the number and the size of roofs or houses in an area, or estimate the amount of human activity in areas. This also goes to national security, sovereignty. And again, as always, there are issues or there are concerns around privacy and security. But I do know that this is something that is being done. I think the broader question, though, is this isn't as much of an issue in the generative model space. This is more in the, call it, super resolution of images. That's something that these AI models can do. So in essence, from a really blurry image, because you have trained on a lot of data, maybe you can better de-blur an image. And that can apply in the satellite context. That could also apply in the drone context. Now, with all of these things, you have to think about what happens if you get it wrong, meaning what happens if the tools that you're using give you a result that is either not correct or harmful. And those things have been seen when technologies or tools have been used in this context. The unintended consequences must be considered. The negative impacts to potentially, whether it's innocent people or bystanders, must be considered.
Yeah. I think it must always be, when you're thinking about applying AI and not just generative AI, the first thing is like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? How would this technology help you better? In the case of drones, like it's not like you can just point the drone at something and can tell you like, yeah, that's a bad ship, that's a good ship. You got to give it examples, so that it can then learn.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the learning, there's the question of, as Dr. Remy talked about, false positives. What happens if it gets it wrong? In the case of like an image recognition, it's not a high risk. But think about it in terms of like medical AI. Like I was chatting with some folks from an organization. We were looking at AI to help with scans. I was like, what happens if we augment that image with AI? It'll be great because then we can see better resolution. What happens if it augments the wrong piece and they give a bad diagnosis? That's terrible. It could affect the patient's life. So there's a risk attached to every time it does a false positive, and you must weigh that with the effectiveness of the algorithm that you're using and the training model with the examples as well.
Thank you. And just another question coming from Mr. Wayne Calendar. What are the practical uses that we can deploy AI in order to boost, diversify the economies of the region away from dependency on single products?
I think we might need a follow-up conversation to explore that one.
It's pretty broad. But,
yeah.
I mean, I'd ask yourself, start with a question, like what are you trying to do what are you doing today that's kind of painful that you think AI can help solve? I've seen great applications of AI in gaming, finance, healthcare, even social services, things like customer service assistance. Like I showed you the example with the passport. I mean, that was just me thinking in 3 minutes. Sit and think about what's the hard things that happen in society. What can you make better? And then think about, you've seen what a large language model can do. You've seen what an image generator can do. What process can you figure out that if this thing worked well, it would make it easier? And then you can focus on how can you make it work well. Once you figure it out, like if we introduce this, it will help it work well. And those are the kind of questions and answers you kind of probably have to work on as and this is me just putting on an entrepreneur's hat, but as an individual living in society as well, we can ask ourselves that question, like what's happening today we don't like, and what do we think technology can help do better?
Okay, I notice here, thank you very much. Dr. Clarence Henry again, he's asking, here goes the efforts toward developing the orange economy. How can developing countries use AI to advance economic growth and development? That's his question. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure I fully understand some elements of it, but perhaps you may.
I'd be intrigued to understand or to confirm whether he's talking about the fruits or there's another type of orange economy that could be discussed. I guess we could ask ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah, that would be helpful because I'm not familiar with the orange economy.
But as that clarification comes, I think that there's an underlying thing that I must say. There is no one way that AI can or should be applied. There are many different ways. So for example, if you were to think of, like somebody asked this question earlier, surveys. Surveys, people go door to door. Well, maybe you use AI to help you figure out how many doors you need to go to or where the doors should be. Or maybe you use AI to engage via chat because that's a scale. So AI can do different things, can provide different kinds of functionalities, but this element of there is no one way. There may be one way that you might be interested in, but know that when we're talking about AI, it's very broad. So I see the clarification. The orange economy is a term used to refer to the creative sector.
So, yeah, I actually got that same response from ChatGPT. And then I asked ChatGPT, how can we use it to help? How can AI be used to help with the region? It gave me some answers, which I would agree with. I mean, look at it as an augmentation, not a replacement for helping boost these economies. The same way like people would use Photoshop to airbrush digital photos to make them look better. You can think of AI as being your Swiss Army knife for helping you be more creative or express creativity fast in a more efficient manner. I've seen wonderful things created by myself just using my own computer. Imagine if I was a trained artist. I'm sure I can use these as foundation models for then generating even better things. Let's see what you can do. Yeah, I mean, there's always a question of like copyright and how do you, I mean, if we follow the American path, we can copyright things generated with AI. They actually said some clarification, like you may not be able to copyright the entire thing, but just the pieces that are generated, so you can build on top of it and add stuff in there. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm doing a great answer there.
Yeah, I think it's part of a broader discussion, and I think somebody else pointed out in the chat just this week, there was already a panel on this. I can say I share a name and probably relationships with at least 3 people on the panel. So give the plug that there was a Queen's Hall panel on creativity, AI, and Carnival. I don't know the proper name. But there's a lot of content, a lot of discussion in this space, and I'm happy that it's happening in a Caribbean context now.
Okay, thank you very much. And Dr. Jennifer Rouse, on behalf of a colleague who is in his 70s and in the early stages of Parkinson's disease, which is a degenerative disease over an inordinately long period of time. As it is a neurological illness, there is anxiety about the imminent loss of independence are AI devices being considered to assist such persons, especially given that Trinidad and Tobago has an aging population?
Mhm. I don't have clean, clear answers. I know that there is research in that space. I can't speak to products, so I can't even speak to call it, if we're talking AI devices, then there's a whole process that in essence might be something considered as a medical device. And there is a context through which medical devices can be adopted broadly. I'm happy to follow up offline if there's a way to connect, and I can see what I can find. But this is not something that I can say offhand in the Caribbean context. But I do know it's broadly, there are research papers in this space, there are whole labs. Aging in place is also an element more broadly outside of particular conditions. And one of the questions that people are asking is how can these technologies support, not just in terms of assistive technologies more broadly, but even in terms of diagnosis, even in terms of companionship. Again, there is a very rich research space there.
Yeah. The area of robotics crossing with AI was probably where we want to go to with that conversation. It's totally separate. First of all, my somebody's dear friend, it's not an easy road they're going to follow with Parkinson's, but there's hope with the technology advancing at the pace it is. The question of like advanced technology from the first world nations tend to not trickle down to Caribbean nations for a while, but our hope is that as it becomes more ubiquitous, that process becomes smoother. But yeah, there is research in those areas, but it's not something I'm totally on top of.
It sounds like a topic for another visitors panel.
Actually, there is a comment by one of the members of the audience, Jackie John, who in fact thanks the panel for the great discussion that is taking place. And that's exactly the question that is posed. How do we follow up on this discussion after this meeting? Any thoughts on it from any of you?
My profile is on LinkedIn. I let people reach out to me on LinkedIn and ask me questions. We have Dr. St. Bernard, who has been trying to facilitate us. If he wants to facilitate further sessions, I'm always available.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay. Well, the only problem is I'm due to retire next week, so. But
maybe
anyway,
we find a way to keep you around, right?
But I have plans that could ensure that you guys continue to be part of this discourse. So I'll be happy to include you in my plans post-retirement.
Awesome.
Yes, so I move on now to a very interesting name here, Mr. Kenrick Jordan. I do remember him from the Gwadi circles in the late 1970s in UWI. He will know what I'm talking about when I make reference to Gwadi. And his question goes like this. Since we'll always need to generate new data, do we see society hitting real constraints to that human process? In other ways, will machine learning close in on the human data generation process? And that's a very interesting question because it's one that I normally ask given the kind of work and my academic interest.
I think that it is a question that will need to be unpacked because there are multiple layers to that question. I think that machine learning, just like any other technology or any other truly impactful technology, is something that will change how we think, change how we operate as societies. It will change things like how we legislate. So this notion, for example, of cars need to drive on a certain side of the road, that's a choice that came. Somebody decided, well, a car has to be either on the left side or the right side. And as a result, there are all of these downstream effects. Or somebody decided how wide should a car be, or how wide should a bridge be. Like all of these are things that are impacted by the technologies that are available. And I think at the end of the day, we will be influenced or we will be impacted by decisions that are made now with technology and as those technologies are built. But I don't think that humanity will not, it's not, this is, there's a very large debate going on now about whether AI is an existential threat to humanity. I'm happy that we're having those discussions. I am not of the view that this is all doom and gloom. There's also an element, though, that we have to understand our tools, because if we don't use the tools properly, we can do harm. And we have to be accountable for the harm that we do with our tools. So it's an interesting time to be an academic. The Zawadi days or Awadi days, I'm not sure what those days were, but it sounds as if there's a rich history of asking deep questions. And I think that this is one of those deep questions that should be encouraged with a broader group of people with diverse backgrounds, because I think that's the only way that we'll be able to really address it.
Well, to respond to your concern about the Gwadi days, Gwadi is a term, it really means get up and do it yourself. It was a term developed when a football league was actually organized on the campus in the late 1980s, and I think the late 1970s, and up until today, it still prevails. So it says something about those who were the key instigators of Gwadi. And I think, in terms of the ideas generation, back in those days, there was also the iRoom on the campus here in St. Augustine, and a lot of heated topical debates around development issues were discussed in the iRoom. And I am sure Kendrick Jordan, among others who were part of the UE fold in those days, would fully understand what I am getting at. So in a sense, you were spot on. Yes, so the Nkosi Neptune. Yes, the introduction of these connectivity speeds, 5G, Hi-Fi, 6G, and other considerably new infrastructure, when the, I see something here, IoT, when the IoT are put in place, with the data void, this region is now compared to this part of the world, would we have persons to sort this information, or will we be using an AI? The wording is kind of confusing. Sometimes when these questions come in, the language is a bit confusing and the punctuation. So please excuse me if I chopped up your question, Mr. Neptune. I don't know if the panelists got a gist of it.
I guess he's talking about the IoT devices, Internet of Things devices. These are like sensors and stuff that give you a lot of data really frequently. You can identify friends off of it with normal statistical methods. It doesn't have to be AI. But I'm guessing he wants to do something deeper. Again, making sense out of massive amounts of data is probably what data warehousing and not AI does. But where AI comes into play is probably when you want to process it to kind of, you have a hypothesis and you want to kind of expound on that hypothesis to figure out, can you find a trend? Not necessarily generative AI, but just general machine learning questions in general. Dr. Remy, probably you're better suited for this. That's more your field than mine.
So there was a piece of the question that I cued in on, and that piece of the data void. One of the things that there is, so when you look at how most of the recent advances in AI have come from curation or access to massive amounts of data, not just text, but even in the molecular discovery space, there's all There are large databases that people are now ingesting. So there's a rush to ingest stuff, even if you don't know what's in it. And again, that's not always a good thing. But the notion of a data void, probably we're talking there about being able to have data captured in a manner that makes it useful. Because especially when we look at like mobile devices, cell phones now have cameras that you can use to take pictures of the moon, and you can see craters. So in our, whether we're talking 5G or just Wi-Fi, in our devices now, we have access to processing. Maybe some of these phones even have GPUs. There's a lot of processing. There's a lot of high resolution data collection that is possible with modest means. But having that information made available in a manner that is actionable is always a challenge. Since I've been in Kenya, I've gotten to see a lot of agricultural applications of AI and machine learning. That's, I mean, people are using it in pest detection or disease detection. But at the same point in time, these things are probably happening in silos. If there were more effective ways to make sense of that information at scale, then maybe these tools would be a little bit more effective, or maybe there are insights that can be captured earlier than we're able to capture now. But it all comes back to what's the data? Who has access to it? Who controls it? How can it be used? How should it be used? And like that piece about a data void, it's normally not a real void. It's an operational void in most cases.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Remy, for your response. Of course, this has been a very stimulating discussion. When I look at the comments we are getting from the audience, the virtual audience, I'm really encouraged by the responses, and it speaks volumes in terms of the content of the discourse, especially the answers given by the panelists to some really worthy and sometimes difficult questions from the virtual audience. And I'm mindful that our panelists are operating from different time zones that are way ahead of us in terms of the time of day. And of course, our colleague, our panelist from Australia, it's way past his bedtime, I would assume, unless he works really early in the morning. So we have to think about closing shop. And this is the last question that I am going to pose before the vote of thanks. And it comes from Christine Marrett out of the Mona campus at UWI. And she's asking, is UE a clearinghouse for information for training AI, or I presume for AI training, as suggested in the response? If not, how does UE become a clearinghouse for the information for training AI, or I presume for AI training? I may be in a bit over my head here, something like that.
I don't think I can answer with authority, but if it's not, this is a call to action for many departments on campus. But I can say that in the past 2 years, I've engaged with a lot of people who are in UE. Most of them are in St. Augustine. There's a Trini bias, of course, that sometimes persists. But I think across the Caribbean, there are lots of academic professionals. There are lots of people trained at UE who are doing amazing things. I think I can drop a link. There's a YouTube channel, the Caribbean Tech Pioneers, that has been intentional about trying to find Caribbean people wherever they are in the tech sector, having them tell their story. So I think I can, when Nishan is answering his part, I think I'll do a quick search and drop that link in the chat. There is a lot Caribbean people have done, like historically been foundational in many of these institutions of higher learning across the globe, many economies across the globe. And it's just a matter of finding out who these people are and giving them opportunities like this to connect. So again, thank you, Solisys.
I mean, for me, remember, just the whole thing with AI, it's data hungry. It learns from examples. You want to get as much information, relevant information, when you're training a model to help answer a specific task. UE is the perfect breeding ground for this. So much academic research there, so much raw data that is processed to produce these papers that we write. What I would probably ask is that maybe extend beyond the university. UE be the lighthouse for other academic institutions in the region to help unify all these data sources. Beyond, like, I mean, there's central statistical offices that collect some stuff, but there's only a certain amount that they can do. But yeah, it can get there. But it's not training. Did they say training AI or like training as in training yourself to build these things, or training the models? Because I'm assuming it's training the models.
Well,
Yes?
I'm seeing a correction from Christine Merritt, and she said I meant training the AI systems, not training in AI.
Yeah. That was correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, the data models themselves, they're the AI models, they're data intensive. You want to go where there's the most amount of data. If academic research doesn't produce that data, then I don't know what else does, because the amount of stuff and labs that people have had to go through to produce their PhD and even just their MSc thesis, that data can be useful in other ways. It's just for us to kind of pose those questions out there, what we're trying to answer, to then use that data to help train a model to answer it.
Yeah, there's one thing that I was at a meeting in Ghana maybe 2 weeks ago, and one of the questions came up. You have an agricultural sciences division. All of the theses and dissertations that have been written about soil science, who has access to that information? Could a large language model be fine-tuned with the data locked in the libraries so that farmers now can make use of that contextually relevant information? And I think it's an opportunity. Maybe this is like an IEEE standards thing that can help unlock, or maybe it's the university like collaborating with a different campus, different part-time campus. But yeah, there's a lot of data in our, call it libraries, in our institutional memory that could be used to make this real and add value.
Wow, wonderful stuff, I must say. I'm really happy that we have been able to witness this. And just to put in a plug for UE, I think, I'm aware that on the St. Augustine campus, as well as on the Mona campus, I'm not sure about the Keyville campus. I know the Department of Mathematics and Computer Science on both campuses do offer degrees in data science, and I think, that is perhaps where some of these issues may begin to come into fruition as far as an academic and scholarly flavor is concerned. So I know that UE has been making some steps to develop its offering as far as training burgeoning professionals in these issues. And as I listen, as a statistician and as someone who is closely allied to national statistical offices in the region and globally, in fact, there's going to be a big statisticians conference in Nassau, Bahamas in November, which I'll be attending. And I know that AI is becoming an issue that statisticians in the National Statistical Office have increasingly becoming aware of. And just last year, I participated in an online seminar out of Statistics Canada, which is perhaps one of the best national statistical offices in the world. And AI, there were, and quite a large number of presentations on AI and official statistics. And so already, there are trusts in the direction of, incorporating developments regarding artificial intelligence and programming issues to help with, some of the mind-boggling issues that continue to plague national statistical offices and their operations to produce data So having said this, I would want to bring this session to a close, and of course, a short vote of thanks, where, as usual, we would not have a successful engagement such as this one without the presence of the virtual audience. And I really want to, first of all, start by thanking the virtual audience for their continued support of all of these Salisis events. As I said at the beginning, we had 127 persons registered for this particular event, and it's not unusual because our events seem to attract large numbers, and we are very happy that we have been able to attract large numbers. And as I said, many of our postings on YouTube have actually found its way in classrooms, and whether in secondary schools and tertiary institutions globally. I have been informed of that. So, and everything is there. So if you go online, if you go into the chat, you can actually see the links for all of the events that we have had so far, right? So I urge you to check the chat and find the links to all of the events that we have had so far. So thank you very much to the audience, the virtual audience. Many of you are regulars, and I want to thank all of the regulars and all of the newcomers for gracing us with their presence today. I also want to thank the staff at Marketing and Communication at the UWI St. Augustine. They are the main pillars and anchors of these events, and they help graciously in ensuring that we obtain high standards of professionalism in our product. And of course, we do attempt as far as possible to attain those standards. In particular, I want to single out Ms. Joanne Green, who from as far back as October 2021, when we first started all of these events, when I became and assumed the directorship of Salisis, Ms. Green has always been willing and ready to hold our hands and guide us technically and otherwise through the production process. And I really want to wholeheartedly, from deep within, thank Ms. Joanne Green and her team from the Marketing and Communication Unit for their continuous and tremendous support over the past 2 years, so to speak. I also want to thank my staff in Salisis, I mean, the rocks who make Salisis functional. And for the past 2 years, Mr. Sheldon Warner, Mr. Ephraim Thompson, Ms. Francine Allen, Mr. Leslie Brewster, and Ms. Katian Modest. In particular, the last one, Ms. Katian Modest. I want to thank them for their continuous support, their high level of diligence, and of course, their commitment to detail and ensuring that the show goes on as much as possible without a hitch, dotting the I's, crossing the T's. And Ms. Katian Modest in particular, she has been my secretary for the past 2 years, and I want to thank her for continued vigilance in ensuring that, you know, everything in the office goes as planned. So thank you very much to my able staff in Salisis for all of the support you have given me over the past 2 years to ensure that, you know, the Salisis ship continued to prosper and deliver what it ought to deliver to the various publics, whether locally, regionally, or internationally. Today with us, we have Ms. Samantha Morgan, who is assisting us with some of the production of what we are doing today. She has been well trained by Ms. Joanne Green, and I want to express my sincerest thanks to Ms. Morgan for the assistance she has provided from time to time in ensuring that, you know, Salisis products come off well. And last but not least, the two panelists, Dr. Sekou Remy and Mr. Nissan Dookeran, two sons of the soil who, based on what transpired today, we ought to be extremely proud of in terms of flying red, white, and black, high and far, and with such dignity and tremendous significance. We want to thank both of you for graciously sparing the 2 hours, the 2+ hours with us to ensure that this product came off seamlessly without a hitch. And I think it will be lodged in the minds of all of those who witnessed it today, how potent, the impact of AI will be as we move into the 2030s, the 2040s, and 2050s. And I think those who survive to experience those times will probably have a different world to live in. And I think as of now, we have to start preparing ourselves, and especially our children, for that world. The last remark I want to make is that as of next Friday, I will be retired from the University of the West Indies. I must say that notwithstanding challenges, I did my best to perform at the level that has been befitting of an academic and scholar. I know those who know me are aware of the contributions I've made locally in Trinidad and Tobago. I've made tremendous contributions to the region and indeed internationally. And I feel comfortable in my skin that, I have made those contributions, and I will continue to do so post-retirement. Already there are there are great opportunities presenting themselves, and I shall continue to do the work that I do. I always say that I am here to do work that was ordained by the Master, by God, and I will continue doing God's will on earth as far as academic enterprise, scholarly enterprise, and contributing to development, justice, and development processes, bearing in mind all the standards of equity, fairness, and justice. I mean, that's my motto, and I am thankful that, I had the opportunity in the university to do some of this, and I think that opportunity has prepared me for living life for the rest of my life. So thanks to all of you who supported all of the ventures that that I led as part of Salisis, as a Salisis product over the past 2 years. Thank you to all of you for your contributions and your participation and your kind words. And I trust that many of you whom I already know, I will see you all in various pastures as we continue to engage in professional levels of enterprise around the world. And of course, those who I may not know, if you see me in the street, don't hesitate to call me out. I am happy to be of help in any which way I can. So having said that, thanks for all of the mercies, thanks for all of the support. And I have to say, except for an event that will happen next Friday, this is the last of the Salisis events that I shall be presiding over. In terms of what's happening next Friday, at 1 p.m. in the Salisis conference room, I don't know if many of you are aware that Professor Selwyn Ryan was the director of the Institute when I joined in 1993. And upon his death, we embarked on a project where we intended to receive more than 40, but we received 40 tributes of his life and work from dear colleagues and friends and other associates. And that has been put into book form. I have edited it, and that book will be launched next Friday in Salisis, commemorating the life and work of Professor Selwyn Ryan. It's called Remembering Selwyn Ryan, Tributes from Friends and Colleagues, and I am the editor. So you will hear a bit more about it. We will see how we can beam it online, and those of you who can make it to Salisis conference room, you are free to make it to Salisis conference room next Friday at 1 p.m. So having said that, thank you very much. And I'll see many of you in many places in TNT, across the Caribbean and beyond the Caribbean. Have a good day all. Do enjoy.